Hello my gorgeous friends of Webflow, I'm Francesco, and if you don't know who am I, well, in this channel we do Webflow things and we make them simple and accessible to everybody from time to time by using a whiteboard. Today we are gonna build a very cool gallery that we can use to showcase our projects, and that will be animated while scrolling inside a section. And the gallery that we are going to build will look exactly like this. This gallery will be part of my Webflow friendly components library, and you will find the link to my library in the description down below. But now let's take a look at the whiteboard. The structure that we need to build our animation, I would say, is quite simple. First, we need a section that will be the main host of our animation, and the most relevant property of this section is its height, that we are going to set in this specific scenario to 1000 VH. The key things about this property, about the height of the section, is that if we increase this value, the animation will be slower. If we decrease this value, the animation will be faster. So we could use this value to, let's say, define the speed of the entire animation. Then inside our section, we will throw a container that we will call main container. And again, one of its main properties will be its height. And we are going to set the height to 100 VH because we want our experience to take up all the available space inside the viewport. But then another relevant feature is the sticky positioning with a top offset of 0, because we want our main container to be anchored at the top of the viewport, because our main container will act as a camera and the frames of our animation will scroll inside this camera. Then inside the main container we'll throw a frame list that will just be a div block that will host our frame items, which will be, I would say, the main elements of our animation. And in this specific case, we will have 5 of them. And the idea, the basic idea behind this entire animation is that we want each frame, as we scroll through the section, to move on top of the previous one. This will be the basic action of our animation. But before jumping right into Webflow to build this animation together, we need to take a look at how this animation will be structured at the core of the animation itself. And that's why here we have the animation timeline. And the thing to keep in mind, and that we can then use to either tweak this animation on our own or even build our own animation, is that we need to consider how many steps or main steps the animation will be composed of. And as we said, in this specific situation, the main action will be each frame scrolling on top of the previous one. And because we have 5 frames, then the main steps will be 4, because we want the second frame to scroll on top of the first one, so step 1. Then the third one, we want to scroll on top of the second one, second step. Then the fourth on top of the third one, so third step. And then the 5th frame, we want it to scroll on top of the 4th one, so 4 steps. And if we want these steps to be evenly spaced inside our animation timeline, we need to divide the entire length of our animation timeline by the number of steps, so in this case by 4. So we will have 100 divided by 4, which is equal to 25. And this will be the distance between one main step and the following one. This is why here we have divided the animation timeline in 4 parts, and the main keyframes inside our animation, the keyframes around which we are going to build the animation, even if it will be quite complex as an animation, the main keyframes will be 0, 25, 50, 75 and 100%. And if we can understand this concept, we can really get closer to mastering animations inside Webflow. But now, without further ado, let's just jump right into Webflow and build this animation together. And there we go. Let's build this interaction together. Right now, inside this page, I just have my usual initial setup. So global styles, page wrapper, and main div block. So the first thing we need to add to this page is a section. So let's throw in a section. Let's give it a class of section. And as we have already said, the only thing that we need to do to this section is setting its height to, let's say in this case, 1000 VH. And that's it. Then inside this section, we need to throw a container. Let's give it a class of main container. And to this main container, we want to set its height to 100 VH because we want the entire experience to take up all the available space inside the viewport. And then for this reason, we want to set the maximum width to be none instead of the default value. And then the overflow hidden, just because we are going to use scale transforms, move transforms, so we really want to make sure that we don't have, while playing the interaction, we want to make sure that we don't have any overflowing issues. And then we need to set the position to sticky and the top offset to 0. And that's it for the main container. Then inside the main container, we need to add a div block that will be the element that will host the actual frames of the interaction. And so let's call this, let's say, scrolling gallery underscore frame list, because this will be the list of our frames. And there's nothing actually we need to do to this frame list. It's just a wrapper for our frames. And then inside this frame list, let's throw another div block. This will be our actual frame or frame item. So let's give it a class of scrolling gallery underscore frame item. And we can set, let's say, the padding to 3VW on this frame item. And then we want to set its height to 100 VH, because again, we want to make sure that our experience will take up all the available space inside the viewport. And then because we are gonna throw a few elements that are absolutely positioned, we want to make sure that its position is set to relative, so that this will be the reference for our absolutely positioned elements. And then inside this frame item, we need to add another div that will host our image. So we can call it scrolling gallery, let's say frame image wrapper. And this frame image wrapper needs to have a width of 100%, just to make sure that that it takes up all the available space inside our frame item. A height of 100%, and then the overflow set to hidden, and we will see why later on. And then let's also set the borders. So let's choose a color of FA, kind of like, yeah, white, and use a width of 0.5 VW. And that's it for our image wrapper. Then inside our image wrapper, let's throw an image. Let's choose our first image, which will be this one. Let's also make sure that it loads with the page, just make sure that there won't be any flickering content inside the page. So just make sure that all the images are loaded with the page. And then after that, to this image, let's give it a class of, let's say, scrolling gallery frame image. And this image will have a width of 100%, a height of 100%. Then just make sure that it keeps its aspect ratio. We can set the fit property to cover. And then as an initial state, let's say for our interaction, let's also set the scale transform to 1.5 for both the X and Y axis. And this is why we need to set the overflow hidden on the frame image wrapper. Otherwise, yeah, the image will overflow. So this is the reason. So after that, inside our frame item, we need to throw another div block that will be our text wrapper. So let's call it scrolling gallery text wrapper. And, or actually, let's say, just for consistency, frame text wrapper. And this will have its display property set to flex, direction vertical, align right, and let's also set the gap between the rows to, let's say, 0.5 VW. And after that, this is the element that we want to be absolutely positioned. So let's set its position to absolute. And then let's also, let's say, set the bottom offset to 6 VW, the right offset to 6 VW. And that's it for now. Then inside our text wrapper, let's throw the first div block, and this will be the element that will mask the text during the interaction, or actually during the animation. So let's call it scrolling gallery, let's say, text mask. And this is just a div block with the overflow property set to hidden, because we are going to have two lines of text, one for the image title and one for the author of that image. Let's just copy paste this once, and then inside the first one, let's add, let's say, a heading. This will be a H2 heading. We can give it a class of let's say scrolling gallery frame picture title. And this will just have, in this case, yeah, a size of, font size of 4 VW. And we'll have a name of time-lapse sky. Then inside the second text mask, we can throw a text block element, and this will be our scrolling gallery, let's say, frame picture author. And this will have a weight of 500 and a size of 2 VW. And this will be the name for the first image, and actually for all the other images. I took these pictures from Unsplash, so I really want to quote the author of all these images, which are very beautiful, by the way, at least to me. And now, this is kind of the basic setup. We just need to copy paste, let's say, this thing 4 times, so that we have actually 5 frame items, and we just need to update the image and the text for each of these frame items. But as you can see, yeah, because the main container is sticky, now even if I scroll down, I just see the first image. So we can simply select the main container, make sure that its position is set to static, so that we can actually scroll down, but of course we cannot see anything because the overflow property of the main container has been set to hidden. So now, yeah, it's definitely better. So let's just update the images. So this is the second one, which will have this name and the author is the same. Then let's go to the third one. This is the image. Let's update the name. Let's go to the fourth one, which is this one. This is the name, and the last one, which is this image, and this is the name. Now let's just select once again the main container and make sure that we let's say reset everything. So the overflow property needs to be set to hidden, and the position needs to be sticky with an offset of 0. And that's it. Now before we jump into the animation, we need to add a few, as we already said, a few combo classes to some of the elements to make sure that the animation is actually easier to implement and manage. And yeah, so let's just do that. These combo classes will represent our initial conditions for the animation that we are going to associate to the scrolling of this section. And also, as I've just said, they will allow us to more easily build the animation. So let's start by the scrolling gallery frame item. And because we are going to target the rotation of the frame item as well, this is, by the way, a reason why we decided to set the overflow property of the main container to hidden, because rotation of the frame items could cause overflowing issues. We can select the frame item, and then we can add a transform, rotate transform, along the z-axis of -3 degree. But of course, we don't want this to be the initial condition for our animation. We want the first item to have a rotation of 0 along the z-axis. So we can start by adding a combo class, let's say cc1, which stands for combo class 1. And then we can just set the rotation of this first element to 0. Now, let's get rid for a moment of this, once again, of this overflowing hidden property and also of this sticky property. And let's see what happened. Basically, all the others frame wrapper, and we can see that, with the rotation we have overflowing issues, have this -3 rotation along the z-axis. But what we want to do right now, as an initial condition for our animation, we want all these items to be right below the first one, so that we can just animate them one after the other by moving them on top of the previous element. And so to do that, let's first add a combo class of cc2 to the second item, but we're not going to do anything with this combo class. For the third element instead, because we want all the other elements, all the elements except the first one, to be right under, let's say, the viewport, so right under the first element, we want to bring this third element basically on top of the second one. And this will represent the initial condition for the third element, the third frame item. And to do that, we need to apply a move transform of -100% along the y-axis. And we have to do something similar with the fourth and the fifth one. But for the fourth one, we need to go up of an amount of 200%, so -200, because of course we want to bring this on top of the second one, so we have to move it by 100 plus 100, so -200%. And for the fifth one, we need to move it by an amount of -300% along the y-axis. Now we can once again take this back to hidden and sticky with the top offset of 0. And now what we need to do, we need to target, or actually add a combo class to the image wrapper here. So this will be image wrapper cc1, cc2, cc3. We're not going to do anything right now with these combo classes. These classes will actually be used just to easily manage the animation, and we'll see why in a moment. This will be cc-5. Now we have to do the same with the images. So cc1, cc2, cc3, 4, and 5. We also have to do something similar with the picture title. We want each title and also, let's say, each picture author text to start below the mask. So we want them to be hidden as the animation starts, except for the first item, of course. So we're going to do something like that. This will be, actually, we first apply a move transform to the picture title here, and this will be, yeah, of course, minus, actually not minus, just 100 along the y-axis. We want to push it below the mask, and we are going to do the same with the picture author as well. So 100, but then we are going to apply a combo class cc1 here, and we're going to bring it back to 0 because we want this to be the initial condition for the first item. And let's do the same here. And then here we just have to add a combo class without doing anything else. So cc2, and this is third item, cc3, cc3, cc4, cc4, and finally cc5 and cc5. And now we basically have the structure, all the structure that we need to start building the animation, and this is what we are going to do right now. Let's start by first selecting the section and adding a while scrolling in view interaction. So let's play scroll animation, and let's first define the boundaries of this animation. So we want this animation to start when the section is completely in view. So we want to start the animation when the element, so the section in this case, is fully visible. And we want to end our animation not when it's fully invisible, but when there's at least this amount of space, so 100 VH amount of space available, still available. Because we want to see the entire animation ending when the last element is clearly visible in the viewport, just like the first one right now is visible. And so we need to apply an offset that should be at least 100 VH, but we here have percentages. So how can we define this value? So if we select here the section, and if we go to the style panel, we can see that we define a height of 1000 VH. And so in order to calculate in percentage how much 100 VH is relatively to 1000 VH, we can simply do here, let's say 100 divided by 1000, multiplied by 100 to convert the ratio in percentage, and this is 10%. And we can start from that, and we can, let's say, try to increase this value if we're not happy with that. I would probably suggest a value of around 15 or 20 anyway. Let's apply a smoothing of, I would say, 80%. And then let's just add an animation. We can call it, I don't know, scrolling, gallery, and kind of image transition. Okay, and now the reason why we, the two reasons why we decided to apply all those combo classes are, first, if we select an item here, or an element actually, inside the navigator, and we apply a move transform or whatever, we can see here that we are directly targeting all the elements, or actually the children inside the section that have this class, the section gallery frame item with a combo class of CC1. Without a combo class, we would need to click here to open the drop down, and instead of class, we would need to select selected element. And to me, this is kind of redundant, and it would slow down the process. That's why I just prefer to spend a bit of time by adding combo classes instead of having to do this thing for all the actions inside my animation, because this animation in particular will be quite complex and will have a lot of actions inside, so this will make things easier and faster to me. Also, the reason why we added those combo classes with sometimes specific values for some of the properties, and the other reason is because we can avoid adding a bunch here of actions at the 0% step just to define the initial values of the entire animation. And again, this is very useful in this particular case because the animation is, again, quite complex. So having starting with a bunch of, or actually a long list of what we can call initial states just to start with would have been very messy, I would say. Now let's get rid of this action. And now, how many steps or main steps do we have inside our animation, so that we can create kind of the intervals inside our timeline from 0 to 100%. We want to put it simple. We want the second item to scroll on top of the first one, so first step. Then the third one on top of the second one, second step. The fourth on top of the third one, so third step. The last item, the fifth item, on top of the fourth one, so fourth step. And how can we then divide this entire timeline into 4 steps that are equally spaced? Well, we just need to divide 100%, which is the length of this interval, by 4, which is equal to 25%. So let's say that we want each step to take up 25% of the entire timeline here. That being said, we can start with the easiest things probably, and we can start by simply targeting the frame items first, and specifically we are going to target the rotation transform, the scale transform, and we are also going to apply a filter, a grayscale filter, to all these items to make one item, let's say, gray as the following item scrolls on top of it. So let's start by first selecting the first item, and let's add a rotate transform, and we want this to be 0 initially, and as the second item scrolls on top of the first one, we want this to rotate by an amount of, let's say, 3 degrees because we set as an initial state for all the other items -3. So we want this to keep spinning in the same direction, and we place this action at 25% because we said that we want each main step to take up 25% of the entire timeline. So this will go from 0 to 3. In the meantime, we want this also want to apply a filter action, and we said a grayscale filter. So grayscale, and we want this to go from 0. We can just duplicate this step to 100. In the meantime, we also want to target the second item here, and we want this to go from actually 0%, so from its starting position to, let's say, oops, I duplicated the wrong action, to -100, so that it's placed on top of the first element. And also we want to rotate it, and the rotation should go from -3 to 0. There's also another action that we want to apply to the first frame item, which is a scale transform here. So we can, let's say, select this filter action plus scale, just to make sure that this scale action is added right after the filter action, so that here we have, let's say, this first group that is related to the first item, and that this other group of actions that is related to the second item. So a scale transform, and this need to go from let's see, 1 to 0.9. Now if we want this to be here right after the filter action, we can simply select both the move and rotate transforms associated with the second item, and we can simply drag and drop them down and bring them up once again. And yeah, that's it. Now we just have to replicate this same pattern with all the other, let's say, couple of items here. We want to duplicate the rotate action associated with the second item, because basically right now we want to transition from the second to the third item, and so we want the second item to rotate just like the first item did, and we want this action to be completed at 50%. So again, each main step should have a length of, or should take up 25% of all the available space here inside the timeline. So 25 plus 25, 50, and this should go to 3. Then we want also apply once again a gray filter. So here we can select the rotate action plus filter on the second item. This is grayscale. This needs to go from 0. Let's duplicate it to 100. And then the scale transform. So this one that needs to go from 1 to 0.9. And now the move transform associated with the third item. So we can select the third item here, move, and now because we already had that initial condition that allowed us to put the third item on top of the second one, so right under the viewport, we don't have to put this step here to say you need to be at minus 100%, so right under here at 0%. It's already there. So we just need to state when the transition should start. So we can directly, instead of having this action here, then a duplicate of this action that should be here when the transition actually starts, to say, okay, you start from minus 100%, then you, let's say, you stand still at minus 100% until the animation gets to the 25%, then the transition start. Because we have this one in our, we set this one inside the designer, we can get rid of this action and just add the move transform when we want the transition to start. So at 25%. So we just saved an action, and this will happen across the entire animation. So we start from minus 100, and then we just need to duplicate this step, drag and drop it here, and then this will need to go to 0. Or actually, of course, not 0, it's minus 200. And so let's try to preview the animation so far to see what we have. So we have the second item that scrolls on top of the first one, and then we have the third item that scrolls on top of the second one. Now, let's complete this first phase of the animation, and let's do the same for the next couple of items. Actually, we need to target the rotation of the third item that needs to start from -3 along the z-axis. Then we can duplicate it, we can drag and drop it here, and then this can go to 0. We don't need, once again, as we have already noticed for the move transform, we don't need to have a rotate step for the third item here to say, hey, at 0% you need to be at -3. Then you have to keep this value until 25%, and then from 25% at 25% the transition starts. One thing to notice is that even if the rotation along the z-axis was 0 at the very beginning, so without that combo class applied to set the rotation on the third element, we wouldn't be able to see the actual rotation from 0 to -3 here, because everything would happen below the viewport, the performance of the entire animation, because there would be more elements in motion at the same time, even if this is not required, even if this is not useful. So this can be considered actually another reason why we need those initial conditions set by using combo classes. But anyway, we need to target the rotation of the third items from -3 to 0. And now let's bring the fourth item on top of the third one. But that would affect, so with the third item selected, let's add another action, another rotate action, and this will be placed at 75, and again this should be 3. Then we can apply a filter here, transition. We can select this rotate state because we want to put that action right after the rotation. So filter, so grayscale from 0 to, say, let's duplicate this step, bring it here, 100, and then we need the scale transform. Scale on the third item, let's say from 1 again to 0.9, we need to bring the fourth item on top of the third one. So let's first apply a move transform. Oops, we need this here at 50%. So our initial condition for the fourth item is minus 200%. We bring it here, minus 300, and then the rotation. So let's select this step, plus rotation. We need to go from minus 3 to 0. And now let's bring the fifth item on top of the fourth one. Let's duplicate this action here. This needs to be placed at 100. The fourth item is to go to 3, rotation along the z-axis. Then we need to apply a filter transition once again. So filter, grayscale, actually from 0 to 100%, and then a scale transform. From 1 to 0.9, and then we want to bring the fifth item on top of the fourth one. So first, move transform, we need this here at 75. The initial condition was minus 300 this time %. Let's duplicate this action. Let's bring it here on 100%, minus 400. And then we need to target the rotation. That needs to go from minus 3 to duplicate to 0. Let's try to preview the animation so far. So we have the second element on top of the first one, the third on top of the second, then the fourth, and then the fifth. Now, one thing that we could do, and that I actually do a lot of times here, is adding kind of a pause inside the animation. I mean, I don't want the animation to start as soon as I scroll, and let's say after the first step, so after the transition of the second element on top of the first one, I would the animation to pause. I mean, I keep scrolling after the transition, and for a short amount of time nothing happens. Then the third element starts moving on top of the second one, then the animation gets paused again. I mean, once again, I keep on scrolling, but for a short amount of time nothing happens. Then the fourth one transitions on top of the third one, and then the animation gets paused once again, and the fifth element scrolls on top of the fourth one. And this is exactly what we are going to do right now. Pausing the animation is actually not that difficult. We just need to understand how it works. So let's say that we want to introduce a pause before the first step of the animation of 5%, and then the same amount, so 5%, between two following steps. So between the first and the second and the third and the fourth. And to do that, starting from the structure of the animation that we have already built, we can start by simply selecting all the steps all the actions that we have here at 0%. And if we want to introduce a pause, or let's say delay the starting of the animation by an amount of 5%, we just need to write here 5, so that the animation starts when the scrolling of the section reaches the 5% of the animation timeline. Then, to add a delay between the first step of the animation and the second one, we can do, we first need to think of what should happen. So we basically want, let's say, the second element to keep its position for a short amount of time, 5% of the entire animation timeline, and then we want to start transitioning the third item on top of the second one. So if we want to make sure that the second item keeps its position, rotation, filter for an amount of 5% of the entire animation timeline, and if we also want to make sure that the third item doesn't start moving or rotating, we basically need to take first all these steps that are related to the second item. So move, rotate, filter, scale. We need to duplicate them, and we need to set the keyframe here to 30 to make sure that these values don't change between 25% and 30%. And we have to do the same for these two actions associated with the third item. So we can select them, duplicate them, bring them here on 30%. And we have to do the same for the following couples of animations. So here we select these 4 actions that are associated with the third item. So move, rotate, filter, scale. We duplicate them and we set the keyframe to 55. Then we select the 2 actions here that are related to the fourth element. We duplicate them, bring them here. And then let's do the same one more time. So we select all these actions associated with the fourth element, we duplicate them, set the keyframe to 80, then we select the 2 actions associated with the fifth item, and we can bring them onto this group at 80%. But because we have we can simplify this even further, because we set the initial conditions inside Webflow Designer. So, for example, we don't really need these 2 actions to be here anymore, because the move here from the designer is already at -100. So there's no need to have a -100 action here and a -100 action here. We can directly start at 30%. And the same goes for rotation. This -3 was already our initial condition. So being this the very first time these 2 actions for the third element appear here inside the timeline, we can just get rid of these 2 and only keep the ones that are here at 30%. And we can do actually the same here for the fourth element and for the fifth one. Let's quickly review this animation, the animation so far. So let's say we start scrolling, nothing happens until we hit the 5%, then the animation gets played, we reach 25, nothing happens until 30%, then the third item goes on top of the second one. Then the animation gets paused again at 55, the fourth one starts scrolling on top of the third one, and we reach 25, nothing happens until we reach 80%, and at 80% the fifth element starts scrolling on top of the fourth one. So that's it for now. Now we are going to introduce other actions to actually complete our animation, and the next step will be adding the masking animation to the text elements inside our frame items. What we need to do to add the masking animation to our text elements is actually pretty simple, and the idea behind is even simpler, I would say. And the idea is that as soon as the transition of a frame item on top of the other starts, we want the text elements inside the frame item that will fall behind to be animated and to be moved out of the mask. On the other end, we want the text elements inside the frame item that will go on top of the other to be animated inside the mask right before the animation ends. For this reason, for example, we can select our frame picture title element inside the first item here, inside the first frame item, and add an action, a move action first, and we want it to start as soon as the transition of the second item onto the first one starts. And then we are also going to add an opacity transition, and we are going to do the same for our picture order element. So let's add a move transform and then an opacity action. And we want, of course, the two move actions to start from 0% along the y-axis and the opacity to be 100. Then we can select all these four actions, we can duplicate these actions, and the idea is that this transition outside of the mask of both the text elements happens in a short amount of time, so way before the transition ends, so that the movement of the text elements outside of the mask is clearly visible when we scroll down the section. And the interval is definitely, the amount of this interval is definitely up to you. I decided to apply an interval of, let's say, 7.5%. So these four actions should be at 5 plus 7.5, which is 12.5%. And at 12.5%, the transition of the text elements outside of the mask should end. So the move transform should go to minus 100 and the opacity should drop to 0. And now, what about the text elements inside the second frame? We said that we want the animation the masking animation to start right before the transition ends. And for example, we can choose an interval of 2.5%. I mean, 2.5% before the animation, the transition ends, we start animating the text elements. And so we can first, let's say, select the picture title inside the second frame item, add a move transform, then an opacity transform. We can do the same with the picture author inside the second element, move, opacity, and because we are also using combo classes here, it's also clear that we are targeting the elements inside the second frame item. Now we can first drag and drop these elements here at 25% when the transition of the second element on top of the first one ends. But we said we want the text transition to start 2.5% before the actual transition of the second frame item onto the first one ends. And so these four steps, these four actions should be at 25 minus 2.5%. So at 22.5. The move transform should be equal to 100, so below the mask, and the opacity should be 0, of course. Then we just need to select all these four elements, we can duplicate them, and we can drag and drop them onto the 25% group. So now the move transform should go to 0, and the opacity should go to 100%. And now we just need to do this thing for all, let's say, the couples of frames inside our animation. And so let's do that for the second and the third items. In this case, we just need to select these 4 elements that we already have for the author and the title text elements inside the second frame item. We can duplicate them, and again we want the transition to start, because right now the second frame will be the one that will fall below. We want the transition to start as soon as the transition, in this case of the third element on top of the second element, starts, so at 30%. And these are the right values. We want the move transform to be 0 and the opacity to be 100, and this needs to end after 7.5%. So we can duplicate once again these actions, and these actions should be at 30 plus 7.5%. So the move transform should be once again minus 100, and the opacity should be 0. Now we have to add the actions for the text elements inside the third element. So we can select the frame picture title inside the third element. We can first add a move transform and opacity transform. Do the same for the author. So move, opacity, move transform should be 100, opacity should be 0, and then we can simply select these actions and drag and drop them first here at 50. And then once again, we want this transition to start 2.5% before the transition of the third element on top of the second one ends. So at 50 minus 2.5, so 47.5%. And then we can simply duplicate this group here of actions, drag and drop it onto the 50% group, and now the move transform should go to 0 and the opacity should go to 100%. Then once again, I'll go quickly now. We can select these 4 actions regarding the third frame item. We can duplicate them, drag and drop them here onto the group of 55%. Then we can duplicate them once again. This will be equal to 55 plus 7.5%. Move transform should be minus 100. Opacity should be 0. Now we need to add the actions for the text elements inside the fourth frame item. So move, opacity, and then for the other element, move, then opacity, move is 100, and opacity is 0. Then we can select this group, we can drag and drop it here at 25. Then this needs to start at 25 minus 2.5, and then we need to duplicate this group once again, drag and drop it onto the 75 group. Move transform needs to be 0, and the opacity needs to be 100. And now the very last time, we duplicate this group of actions, drag and drop them here, 80% group, duplicate them once again. This will be at 80 plus 7.5, so 87.5. Move transform needs to be minus 100, opacity needs to be 0, and now the actions for the text elements inside the fifth frame item. So move, transform, opacity, move, transform, opacity. Once again, the move transform is initially 100%, opacity is initially 0. Then we select all these 4 actions. We can drag and drop them here on the 100% group. Then we need to subtract 2.5, so 97.5. Then we can duplicate them once again, drag and drop them here onto the 100 group, and the move transform needs to be 0, and the opacity needs to be 100%. Now let's hit save. Let's scroll back to the top, and let's try to preview what we have so far. So we start scrolling, the animation starts, and the text inside the first frame starts moving outside of the mask. Then, way too quickly. Now right before the transition of the second element is over, we can see that text starts going out of the mask, or actually going inside the mask. And then once again, it goes out, and the other goes in. But we don't want to stop here, so we are going to add a few other cool things to our animation. And yeah, let's see how we can make it even cooler. The first thing we are going to add is a move transform along the y-axis to each image as the following frame item scrolls on top of the previous one. So for example, for the first image here, we want, as soon as the transition of the second frame item onto the first one starts, we want the move transform of the image along the y-axis to be 0%. But then, when the transition ends, so when the second item is on top of the first one, we want the move transform of the first image to be minus 10 along the y-axis. So for example, let's test this out, and we can see that the image is slightly moving upward inside the frame as the second item scrolls on top of the first one. And we are going to do this for all the transitions. So for example, here at 30, we want to apply a move transform to the second image here. So we select the image of the second frame item, we add a move transform, and at 30, so as the transition of the third item onto the second one starts, we want the move transform to be 0%. Then we want to duplicate this action, and at 50 we want it to be minus 10%. So we want it to be minus 10% when the third item is completely on top of the second one, so when the second transition is over. And let's do that for the third image as well. So let's select the third image, let's add a move transform, let's drag and drop it on top of the 55% group. So here we want it to be 0%. Then let's duplicate the action, let's drag and drop it onto the 75% group, minus 10. And then finally we have to select the fourth image, add a move transform, and let's drag and drop it onto the 80% group when the last transition starts. So 0%, and then let's duplicate it, drag and drop it onto the 100% group, and minus 10%. Now we won't stop here. We are going to add also a scaling transform to the image. So let's do that. Same keyframes, nothing changes, just the type of action. So scale here, and at the very beginning we want it to be 1.05, and we want it to scale down to 1. Let's do the same for the second image. So scale transform 1.05, and then at 50% 1. Then let's do that for the third image. Scale 1.05, and then at 75 we want it to be 1. Then at 80 let's select the fourth image. Oops. Scale transform 1.05, and at 100% 1. And also let's add a blur filter to each image. Once again, same keyframes, only the action is changing. So filter blur 0 at the very beginning, then we want it to go up to 7. Then let's do that for the second image. So filter blur 0. Let's duplicate the action, and at 57. Then third image, filter 0, and then at 75 7. And finally, fourth image, filter blur 0, let's duplicate it, and at 100% we want it to be 7. And now let's preview what we have. So yeah, let's scroll to the top first. Now we can see that the image slightly moves upward, and then it gets blurred, and it's also scaling down, and this is happening for all the images. Now, the very last thing that we want to do here, we can see that even if the content gets grayed out, the image gets blurred, the border is always white. So we kind of want to make it darker a little bit. And so this is the very last thing that we are gonna add to our animation. We are going to make the border here a bit darker as each transition occurs. And so let's do that. So let's select the frame image wrapper, which is the one having, so we can see here, the one having frame image wrapper, the one having the border, the white border here. And so back in our animation, select the first image wrapper. We add an animation, we add an action, this time border color. Let's drag and drop it here. Same keyframes once again. So at the very beginning, yeah, we want it to be kind of white, then we duplicate it, and then at 25 we want it to be, let's say, 333. Then at 30, yeah, let's select the second image wrapper. So border color, let's drag and drop it here at 30. So white to start with, and then we want it to go to, at 50 we want it to go to 333 once again. Then let's select third image wrapper, border color, and so at 55 we want it to be white. Then let's duplicate it at 55, 333, and then last time image wrapper of the fourth item, border color, let's write it here, the value 80, white, and then at 100 we want it to be 333. Now let's scroll all the way up. Let's see it save. Let's go to preview mode and let's see what happens. So we can see that as the transition occurs, the border gets darker and darker, so everything seems to be working even better than before. And that's it. Now just a couple of considerations about responsiveness and we're done. When it comes to responsiveness, we don't really have too much to do actually for this kind of animation. I mean, probably the most important thing is that because the aspect ratio of the device changes, we want to make sure that this text is moved on the top of each frame, just to make sure that the masking animation can be actually seen. You can see that, yeah, we cannot actually see anything of the masking animation, well, part of the animation, maybe this one here as the transition ends, but not the one that happens when the transition starts. And so this is the first thing that we are gonna do for responsiveness. So we just want to select the text wrapper here and simply select the top right option here, and we want for tablet this one to be 9 VW, and then the right offset we want it to be 11 VW. And then let's go to mobile portrait. We want this to be maybe 11 and this one to be 13. And now as you can see, the text gets way too small, so we are going to increase it a little bit, and we are going to select this one. And actually let's first get rid of the combo class for a moment so that we can target the base class. And instead of having 4 here, we are going to set the font size to 6, and we can apply once again the combo class. And here let's get rid once again of the combo class. Instead of 2 we can have 3. Let's add the combo class once again, so we can see that it's, yeah, definitely more readable, or we can increase this size how much we want, of course. And then the very last thing, we can add a bit of padding, or actually increase the padding of the frame item. So instead of having 3 here, let's get rid of the comp class for a moment. We can have 6 everywhere. And then let's add the comp class once again, and it definitely looks better now. We don't have to do anything more than that to take care of responsiveness, and yeah, we are done. The animation was quite complex to build, but if we know how we can divide it into steps, it's definitely way easier to handle. Thank you so much everybody for watching this video, and if you liked it, well, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any suggestions or want to share thoughts about things I might improve, well, feel absolutely free to throw a comment down below. And my recommendation today is a song from a band that I love. They are the Poets of the Fall, and the song is called Children of the Sun. So, see you next time. Ciao, matane!